Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we step into the hushed corridors of a grand old library, a place of learning, of whispered secrets, and, as you'll soon hear, of sudden death. For when the storm breaks over Mapleton, it will trap more than books inside those walls. It will trap a murderer. The storm had rolled in quickly, the kind that New Englanders knew well. Thick sheets of rain and sharp cracks of thunder, rattling window panes and flooding the streets. By the time Detective James Whitlock arrived at the Mapleton Public Library, his coat was soaked through, and his fedora brim dripped steadily onto the marble steps. He paused at the great oak doors, pulling them open against the wind. Inside, the library's cavernous hall swallowed him whole, its echoing silence broken only by the low hum of storm and the steady drip from his coat. The air smelled of old paper and floor polish, a strangely comforting scent, though tonight it carried an edge of unease. The call had come scarcely 20 minutes earlier. Miss Eleanor Price, head librarian of 30 years, had been found dead among the stacks. The initial report said she had fallen from the wrought iron staircase that curled up toward the mezzanine. A terrible accident, some believed. But Whitlock had learned long ago that accidents often wore disguises. He was met by Officer Tom Bailey, a young patrolman still green around the edges. "Detective Whitlock," Bailey said nervously, adjusting his cap. "She's this way, sir. The others are waiting." Whitlock followed, his footsteps muted on the marble floor. The main reading hall stretched wide, its rows of tall windows flashing with lightning. Shadows of shelves and pillars danced across the walls. The storm outside made the library feel both alive and watchful. They turned down a side aisle lined with heavy shelves stacked with leather-bound volumes. And there, on the polished floor at the base of the iron staircase, lay Miss Eleanor Price. Her gray hair fanned across the marble, spectacles shattered nearby. She wore a sensible navy dress, one sleeve torn as though caught. Her expression was frozen in mild surprise, eyes open to the ceiling above. Whitlock crouched beside her. He noted the angle of the fall, the position of her hands, and the curious absence of a book or papers near her. If she had been climbing, surely she had something in her hands. He glanced up at the staircase. Sturdy iron steps, slick with rain from an open window above, but the railing bore scratches, fresh and sharp, as if something had struck it with force. He rose slowly, his gaze moving toward the small cluster of townsfolk gathered at a distance. The storm had stranded them all here, unable to leave until the roads cleared, and in Whitlock's mind, that meant one of them had a secret, perhaps even blood on their hands. There was Mr. Alfred Green, the portly town treasurer, dabbing his forehead with a handkerchief. Miss Clara Henshaw, a schoolteacher with sharp eyes and tighter lips. Samuel Keene, a traveling salesman who claimed to be seeking shelter from the storm, though his suitcase looked oddly heavy from mere samples. Young Annie Fletcher, the assistant librarian, was pale with shock and clinging to a stack of returned books. And at the back, half hidden in shadow, Reverend Paul Mercer, his black coat blending with the shelves. Whitlock studied them, his expression unreadable. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said evenly, his voice carrying in the hushed hall, "this storm has closed us in for the night, and until it passes, we must face the truth together. Miss Price is dead, and I do not believe it was an accident." A flash of lightning lit their faces, fear, surprise, indignation. The storm boomed as though punctuating his words. Whitlock's eyes narrowed as he noticed a single clue glinting near the body, a small brass key, dropped hastily, its teeth catching the light. A key that surely belonged to one of the gathered souls. But which one, and what had they been trying to unlock? The storm rages outside, the library doors are locked, and inside, Detective Whitlock begins his careful questioning. 6 souls, each with reason to be here, and perhaps reason enough to kill. But which one carries the truth, and which hides a lie? Detective James Whitlock picked up the small brass key with the edge of his handkerchief, turning it under the dim light. It was no ordinary cabinet key. The cut was distinctive, the brass worn from years of use. A librarian's key, perhaps, or something more private. He slipped it into his pocket, noting which of the suspects reacted. Mr. Alfred Green shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his vest. "Detective," he sputtered, "surely you don't mean to suggest foul play? Miss Price she was beloved. Half this town owes her a debt of gratitude for her years of service." Whitlock's eyes flicked to him. "And what do you owe her, Mr. Green?" The treasurer dabbed his brow again, offering a weak chuckle. "Only overdue fines, I assure you." A ripple of nervous laughter passed among the group, but it didn't mask the tension. Outside, thunder rolled long and low, rattling the leaded windows. Whitlock turned to Annie Fletcher, the young assistant librarian. She clutched the books in her arms as though they might shield her. "Miss Fletcher," he said gently, "you found the body?" Her voice trembled. Yes, sir. I came from the reading room to close the upstairs window when I heard the storm. I saw her lying there. I screamed." "Did you see anyone else nearby?" She shook her head, eyes brimming. "No one. The hall was empty." "Curious," Whitlock murmured. "Empty halls in a storm such as this. One would expect everyone to seek shelter together." His gaze drifted toward Reverend Mercer, who stood apart, silent and still, his hands folded within his sleeves. "And you, Reverend, where were you?" The clergyman's voice was calm, measured. "In the reference alcove, praying. Miss Price often allowed me solitude here during the evening hours. The storm drove me to prayer, and perhaps now I know why." A clever answer, Whitlock thought, though it told him little. He turned instead to Samuel Keene, the salesman. The man had the air of a wanderer, slick hair, and a too-wide smile. His suitcase rested at his feet. "Passing through, you said?" Whitlock asked. Keene grinned, showing neat teeth. "That's right, detective. The rain caught me, so I ducked in here for cover. Nothing unusual about that, is there?" "Perhaps not. Though I wonder what samples you carry that weigh so heavily." Keene's grin faltered, just for a second before returning. "Books, naturally. I sell educational sets, dictionaries, encyclopedias, fine wares for fine folk." Whitlock made a note in his leather-bound pad. The storm gave another violent shake to the windows. Clara Henshaw, the schoolteacher, cleared her throat sharply. "Detective, forgive me, but surely you don't intend to keep us all here as suspects? Miss Price must have slipped. The rain, the open window. It was an accident." Whitlock studied her closely. She wore a prim blouse, her hair in a tight bun. Her eyes, however, betrayed something else, nervous calculation. "And yet," Whitlock replied softly, "accidents rarely drop brass keys at their feet." Clara paled, lips pressed thin. The detective paced slowly between the rows of shelves, his shoes clicking faintly on the marble. The library seemed to listen, its high arches holding their voices like secrets waiting to be told. "Each of you has reason to be here tonight," Whitlock said, "and perhaps reason to see Miss Price silenced. I intend to uncover which is true." He stopped, turning sharply back toward them. "We'll start by discovering what this key unlocks." Lightning flashed, bathing the hall in stark white, and in that instant, Whitlock noticed something on the mezzanine above. A door, half hidden behind the shelves, its brass lock gleaming faintly. Whitlock's fingers brushed the key in his pocket as his eyes fixed on that door. What lay behind it? A librarian's office? A storage room? Or perhaps a secret Miss Price had died protecting? The storm batters the windows, the suspects wait in tense silence, and Detective Whitlock holds the key to a hidden door. What lies behind it? Dusty ledgers, forgotten relics, or the secret that cost Eleanor Price her life? Detective James Whitlock ascended the iron staircase slowly, every step ringing like a bell in the vast hall. The others craned their necks upward, their faces pale in the flickering light. His hand closed around the brass key in his pocket, its weight more pronounced than before. The door stood slightly recessed between two towering bookcases. Few would notice it unless they were searching, but Whitlock's eyes had been trained by years of watching shadows. He fit the key into the lock, its teeth catching with a metallic click. For a moment, the storm outside hushed, as though the entire library held its breath. The lock yielded with a groan. Whitlock pushed the door open. The smell of dust and ink rushed out, the scent of secrets long kept. He drew out his pocket torch, its beam cutting through the gloom. It was no ordinary storage closet. Inside stood a desk, old but well kept, its drawers neatly labeled. Shelves lined the walls, filled not with cataloged volumes, but with files, ledgers, and envelopes marked in Eleanor Price's precise hand. A banker's lamp, its shade green and cracked, sat dark upon the desk. Whitlock stepped inside, his shoes crunching faintly on loose paper. One drawer was pulled halfway out, its contents scattered. Someone had been searching in a hurry. He lifted a ledger, its spine stiff, and flipped through. Numbers filled the pages in neat rows: donations, expenses, balances. And there, toward the back, entries that made his brow furrow, large sums withdrawn without explanation, names hastily scratched in the margins, then crossed out. Behind him, a creak on the stairs. Whitlock turned. Annie Fletcher, the young assistant, stood timidly at the threshold. "Detective," she whispered. "That was Miss Price's private office. She never let anyone inside, not even me." Whitlock studied her, then the room again. "Did she mention these ledgers?" Annie shook her head, clutching her arms. "She was careful with money, very careful. If something was wrong, she never spoke of it." A low rumble of thunder rolled over the roof. Whitlock motioned her back toward the hall. "Stay with the others. No one moves until I say so." When he stepped out and closed the door, every eye below was fixed on him. Green, the treasurer, looked especially uneasy, his handkerchief working overtime. Clara Henshaw pursed her lips tighter. Keene, the salesman, smirked faintly, though sweat beaded his brow. Reverend Mercer's gaze remained unreadable, lowered as though in prayer. Whitlock descended slowly. "Miss Price kept careful records," he said aloud. "But someone tried to make those records vanish, someone who had reason to fear what she knew." Green shifted again. "Detective, surely you don't think—" "I think," Whitlock cut him off smoothly, "that money has a way of drawing shadows. And Miss Price may have uncovered a shadow too large to ignore." Lightning cracked. In that burst of light, Whitlock saw Samuel Keene's suitcase glint oddly. Not the dull leather of a salesman's case, but something more rigid. He made a note to examine it later. He was about to press further when Annie gave a sharp cry. All turned. One of the tall windows at the far end of the hall stood wide open, though none had gone near it. Curtains whipped in the wind, rain spattering the floor. "Impossible," Bailey, the patrolman, muttered. "I checked those myself." Whitlock's jaw tightened. If the storm had not opened it, then someone inside had. And if someone inside was bold enough to move while his back was turned— Whitlock strode toward the window, but stopped short. On the sill, damp with rain, lay a single slip of paper, torn from one of Miss Price's ledgers, and scrawled upon it, in hurried ink, was a single word: "Ode." The word "ode" lies scrawled on a torn page. The storm pounds against the library, and Detective Whitlock begins to piece together a picture of secrets bought, sold, and silenced. Who owed Eleanor Price, and how far would they go to keep it hidden? Whitlock lifted the damp slip of paper from the sill. The ink had run where the rain struck, but the word was still legible: "Ode." It was not Eleanor Price's careful script. This was hastily written, almost desperate. He held it aloft. "Someone here has a debt they'd rather keep buried. Miss Price found out, and now she is dead." The suspects shifted uneasily. Annie Fletcher whispered. "She did sometimes mention, well, she hinted that people confided in her, that she kept notes, almost like a record of promises." "Debts?" Whitlock pressed. "Not just money," Annie said nervously. "Favors, secrets. She said knowledge was the true currency." The words sent a murmur through the group. Green dabbed at his forehead. Clara Henshaw folded her arms tight. Samuel Keene smirked, without humor, and Reverend Mercer remained motionless, eyes closed. Whitlock turned to Green first. "Mr. Treasurer, you handle accounts for half this town. Did Miss Price ever challenge your sums?" Green blanched. "Detective, I've always been honest. Yes, there were discrepancies once or twice, but she never accused me of anything. She merely reminded me to be careful." Whitlock's eyes narrowed. "And did you repay that reminder?" Before Green could answer, Clara Henshaw broke in. "This is outrageous! We're trapped here in a storm, accused like criminals, when a good woman has simply suffered an accident." Whitlock turned slowly. "Simply? Then why does a torn ledger page appear on the windowsill, in handwriting not her own? Why does her private office lie ransacked?" Clara's lips pressed into a thin line, her nostrils flaring. "You'll find villains where none exist, detective. That's what men like you do." The storm punctuated her words with a clap of thunder. Whitlock paced, weighing each face. He turned sharply to Samuel Keene. "Open your case!" Keene chuckled. "You don't trust me, eh? Fair enough, nothing to hide." He bent, snapped the latches, and swung it open with a flourish. Inside lay not books, but neat stacks of small leather pouches, each tied with a cord. Whitlock lifted one, heavy in his hand. Coins clinked faintly. He loosened the cord. Silver dollars, gleaming even in the weak light. "Salesman, you said," Whitlock murmured. Keene's grin returned, though tighter now. "I deal in rarities, too. Coin collecting's a noble trade. Harmless." "Harmless," Whitlock echoed, "unless the coins aren't yours to sell." Keene's grin faltered, then returned with forced bravado. "Finders keepers, detective. A man has to earn his living somehow." Whitlock tucked the pouch back, noting the way Green's eyes lingered greedily on the silver. Another thread of motive. Money. Always money. The Reverend finally spoke, voice low but steady. "Detective Miss Price was a guardian of conscience. If she uncovered sin among us, she might have sought repentance, not profit." Whitlock studied him. "Then you believe she confronted someone tonight?" "I believe," Mercer said, his gaze falling on the torn slip of paper, "she reminded them of what they owed, and they silenced her for it." The wind howled as though in agreement, rattling the shelves. Whitlock slipped the note into his pad, mind whirring. "One of you owed more than you could repay. And Miss Price's ledger holds the truth. Until we open every drawer and match every hand to every entry, this storm is the least of your worries." He turned, ready to fetch the ledger, when Annie Fletcher gasped. "Detective, look!" All eyes followed her trembling finger. On the marble floor, just beyond the circle of lamplight, lay a damp footprint. Not Eleanor's, not Whitlock's. Too large for her, too heavy for him. It led from the window, straight into the shadows between the shelves. Whitlock's hand went instinctively to his revolver. Someone was moving among them, unseen, unheard. And the detective knew. The killer was not done yet. A single wet footprint glistens on the marble floor. The storm rages outside. But inside the library, Detective Whitlock knows the killer is not far. Perhaps watching, listening, waiting for their chance to strike again. The lamplight trembled, as if it, too, feared the darkness beyond its reach. Whitlock crouched, running his finger along the damp footprint. The tread was worn smooth but broad, a man's shoe, heavy-soled, the sort a working man might wear. He straightened, eyes darting toward the rows of shelves where the print disappeared. "Stay where you are," he ordered firmly. His voice carried the authority of a man who had faced danger in shadowed alleys and smoke-filled rooms. "No one moves. Whoever stepped from that window is still here." Bailey, the patrolman, paled. "You mean he's in the library now?" Whitlock nodded, "and bold enough to walk among us unseen." He drew his revolver. The click of the hammer echoed like a church bell. Moving slowly, he advanced toward the shelves. Every creak of the floorboard, every hiss of the storm outside seemed amplified. Between the stacks, the smell of old paper thickened and the shadows closed in. He kept the torch beam low, sweeping the aisles. Nothing. Only rows upon rows of silent books, their spines like watchful eyes. Behind him, a floorboard groaned. Whitlock spun. The suspects huddled together, pale and stiff as statues. But Annie Fletcher clutched at Clara Henshaw's sleeve, whispering in terror, "Did you see it?" Someone moved. Clara snapped back, "Nonsense, you're imagining things," but her voice quavered. Whitlock advanced further. Then he saw it. Another footprint, half hidden by the rug at the end of the aisle, fresh, damp. His pulse quickened. He followed it, revolver steady, until the beam of his torch revealed the outline of nothing. The footprints ended at a section of shelves. But the dust along the lower row of books had been disturbed. Someone had moved them. Whitlock slid one volume forward. The shelf groaned faintly, then swung inward. A hidden door. A murmur rippled through the room as the others craned to see. Whitlock whispered to Bailey, "Bring the lantern, quietly." The patrolman complied, though his hands shook. Together they pushed the shelf wider, revealing a narrow passage beyond, descending into blackness. The smell of damp stone drifted out, mingled with the faint scent of oil. Whitlock's voice lowered to a growl. Miss Price knew about this, a secret stair, and our killer knew it too. He raised the lantern, illuminating the first steps. A thin trail of water gleamed there, the intruder's path. Stay here, Whitlock told the group, though he knew none would dare follow. To Bailey he added, guard them. If anyone moves, shout. With revolver in one hand, lantern in the other, Whitlock stepped into the narrow stairwell. The stone walls closed in, damp and cold. His footsteps echoed softly, answering themselves in the dark. Down, down he went, until at last the steps ended in a small chamber. The lantern light revealed stone walls, an old coal chute bricked over, and a heavy wooden chest shoved against the far wall. Whitlock approached, the hairs on his neck rising. The chest was locked, but the lock was old, rusted. He jammed his pocket knife into it and pried. With a squeal, the latch gave way. Inside, instead of coal or dust, lay bundles of envelopes, dozens, perhaps hundreds, each is marked with a name. And on top, written in Eleanor Price's neat hand, a single word, debtors. Whitlock's stomach tightened. Each envelope was sealed, but the names leapt out. Green, Henshaw, Keene, Mercer. Every suspect's name was there. But one envelope had been torn open, its contents missing. The lantern flickered. From behind him, in the dark stairwell, came the faint scrape of a shoe on stone. Someone had followed him down. Deep beneath the library, Detective Whitlock has uncovered a chest of sealed envelopes, Eleanor Price's ledger of debts and secrets. But someone has followed him down into the dark, and the killer may be closer than ever. The scrape of a shoe echoed through the stairwell like a whisper of doom. Whitlock froze, lantern raised high, revolver ready. Who's there? His voice was steady, but the chamber swallowed the sound. The silence pressed back. Then, faintly, a voice floated down. Bailey's. Detective, are you? But it was cut short. A muffled cry, a thud, then nothing. Whitlock cursed under his breath. Bailey had been left to guard the suspects. If someone overpowered him, the killer might have slipped free, or, worse, they were already here. He tightened his grip on the revolver and turned back to the chest. The envelopes rustled faintly in the draft, like whispers from the grave. Eleanor Price had kept meticulous accounts, not of money alone, but of sins, scandals, and betrayals. Each envelope was a life held in her quiet power. The torn one at the top, whose hand had pried it open? He bent, lantern light catching the faint impression of initials written across the flap. Though the ink had smudged, the letters were clear enough. R.M. Reverend Mercer. Whitlock's jaw set. Mercer's calm piety now seemed a mask. But suspicion alone was not proof. He needed the contents, the missing page, and it was gone. The scrape came again, louder this time, closer. Whitlock swung the lantern, its glow catching the outline of a figure on the stairwell. Broad shoulders, a shadowed face. Stop there, Whitlock barked. Another step, and I shoot. The figure hesitated. Then a voice, low and strained. Detective, it isn't what you think. It was Green, the treasurer. His face shone with sweat, his hands raised. Whitlock narrowed his eyes. What are you doing down here? I had to know, Green stammered. Eleanor kept things on me. I thought if I could destroy it. His gaze darted toward the chest. Whitlock cut him off sharply. Stay back. If you touch this, you'll hang for tampering with evidence. Green's voice cracked. You don't understand. She knew everything. My accounts, the shortages. But it wasn't me who killed her. I swear it. The desperation in his tone rang true, but Whitlock had learned long ago that truth and lies often wore the same coat. Before he could press further, a sound above them shattered the tense silence. A scream, high and piercing, Annie Fletcher's voice. Whitlock whirled, lantern swinging. Stay here, he barked at Green, though he knew the man might not obey. He bounded up the stairs, revolver ready, the scream still ringing in his ears. He burst back into the library's main floor. The suspects huddled near the hearth, their faces stricken. Clara clutched Annie's shoulders, trying to soothe her trembling. Samuel Keen stood apart, his smirk gone, eyes darting like a trapped animal. Reverend Mercer stood with head bowed, lips moving silently in prayer. Whitlock scanned. Bailey lay slumped near the table, dazed but breathing, a welt rising on his temple. The lantern he'd held flickered weakly beside him. "What happened?" Whitlock demanded. Annie sobbed, pointing toward the far corner. "Someone was there, watching us. I swear it." Whitlock strode to the corner, revolver up, but the space was empty, only the flutter of a curtain where the storm had forced a window ajar. Someone had been inside. Someone had slipped away. He turned back, face hard. "Enough games. One of you opened that window, one of you struck Bailey, and one of you killed Eleanor Price." His gaze swept the room, pausing on each in turn. Their secrets pressed in like the storm at the glass. And somewhere among them, a murderer's heart beat quick and desperate. From the stairwell behind him came a shout. Green's voice. "Detective! The envelopes! They're gone!" Green's panicked cry echoes up from the stairwell. The incriminating envelopes in Eleanor Price's secret chest have vanished. Secrets once bound in paper and ink are now loose in the hands of a murderer. Whitlock's boots pounded against the worn wood as he rushed back down the stairwell. Lantern light bobbed wildly, throwing grotesque shadows along the stone. Green's face appeared pale and frantic at the bottom. "They're gone," he gasped, pointing at the chest. "I swear, I turned for but a moment and—" Whitlock shoved past him. The chest lay open, its rusted lock twisted and useless, the neat bundles of envelopes stripped away. Only scraps of torn paper fluttered like dry leaves inside. "Someone followed us," Whitlock muttered, his jaw tightened, "and they were quicker than both of us." Green wrung his hands. "It wasn't me! I didn't even move from here." Whitlock studied him. The man's fear seemed genuine, though fear and guilt were often twins. Still, Green's bulk would have made it difficult to slip past without notice. Someone else had crept in, someone who knew how to move silently as a shadow. The detective's mind ticked like a clock. The scream, Annie Fletcher's terror, Bailey struck down, the open window. It was all a diversion, carefully timed. While Whitlock's attention was drawn upstairs, the real prize had been lifted from beneath his very nose. He turned sharply on Green. "Back upstairs! Now!" Green hesitated. "But if the murderer—" Whitlock's voice cut like a knife. "Now!" They returned to the main floor. The group stiffened at their approach. Annie clung to Clara's arm, her eyes wide. Keen paced near the hearth, muttering curses under his breath. Mercer stood serene, yet his gaze flicked too often toward the window. "The chest is empty," Whitlock announced. "The ledger of Eleanor Price's secrets has vanished, which means someone here holds the fate of every one of you in their hands." Gasps rippled through the group. Clara's hand flew to her throat. "Gone? But who could?" Samuel Keen sneered. "Convenient, isn't it? The one thing that could clear this up disappears the moment we turn our backs." He jabbed a finger toward Green. "And who was down there alone with it?" Green bristled. "I didn't touch it. Detective, tell them." Whitlock raised a hand. "Enough. Pointing fingers will not free us from this storm, nor from this killer." He let the silence hang, broken only by the steady drum of rain against the windows. He walked slowly among them, studying faces. "Eleanor Price was blackmailing you all, one by one. The envelopes I saw bore your names. Every last one of you. But one was missing before the chest was emptied. The one marked RM." His gaze fixed on the Reverend. Mercer did not flinch. "I knew she kept such records. She confessed at once, in a moment of weakness. But I did not strike her down." His calm voice carried, steady as a sermon. "My sins are no different from any man's, and hers were greater still." "Perhaps," Whitlock replied coolly, "but someone killed her to silence her forever, and now that ledger will serve as both shield and sword in the killer's hands." Annie's voice quavered. "Then we're trapped. One of us has it, and we'll never know who until it's too late." Whitlock slipped his revolver back into its holster and drew a long breath. He needed to regain control before panic took root. "We will know. Secrets cannot remain hidden forever, not in a storm such as this." Then, without warning, the lights flickered. Once, twice, and then darkness swallowed the room. A cry pierced the gloom. Clara Henshaw's voice. "My pearls! They're gone!" The lantern sputtered back to life, revealing her trembling hands clutching a broken string. The pearls lay scattered across the floor like pale drops of moonlight. And of the suspects, one stood a step closer to her than before. The lights have failed, plunging the library into shadow. In the confusion, Clara Henshaw's pearls have been snatched, only to scatter across the floor. The thief, and the killer, is growing bolder. The pearls gleamed like tiny stars on the polished floorboards. Clara dropped to her knees, scrambling with trembling hands to gather them up, her breath sharp and uneven. Whitlock crouched beside her, lantern held low. "Leave them. Don't touch another." Clara froze, eyes wide. "But they're mine." "They were yours," Whitlock corrected grimly. "Now they're evidence." He stood, turning the lantern slowly across the room. Each face caught in its glow seemed a mask of fear, or was it guilt? Samuel Keene, his jaw tight, eyes glittering. Reverend Mercer, calm but unreadable. Annie Fletcher, pale as paper, clutching Clara's sleeve. And Green, mopping sweat from his brow. Bailey groaned faintly from his place by the table, but he was still too dazed to rise. Whitlock raised his voice. "Listen well. In darkness, someone moved. Not toward the door, not toward escape, toward Clara. They reached for her pearls, broke the string, and nearly vanished with them. That was no accident. It was a test." Keene's laugh was short and harsh. "A test? What kind of game is this, detective?" "Not a game," Whitlock said. "The killer wants to see how bold they can be. Wants to see how far I'll chase them." His eyes narrowed. "And I intend to show them." The storm rattled the windows in answer, rain like knuckles against glass. Whitlock turned to Clara. "Did you feel anything? A hand? A touch?" She shook her head miserably. "Only the snap of the string. It was so sudden." "Too sudden," Whitlock murmured. He bent, lifted one of the pearls, and rolled it between his fingers. A faint smear of something dark clung to its surface. Ink. He straightened, holding it up. The thief carried ink on their hands. Not from writing just now, but from rifling through Eleanor's envelopes. His gaze swept the group. "One of you has the ledger, and one of you killed to keep it." Annie whimpered softly. "Then we're not safe. Not one of us." Mercer's voice rumbled in reply, quiet but steady. "Safe or not, the truth will out. God's hand reveals what man seeks to bury." "Maybe so," Whitlock said, "but I prefer to dig it out myself." He motioned to Bailey, who had managed to pull himself upright. "Bolt the windows." "No one leaves, storm or no storm, and keep your eyes sharp." Bailey nodded weakly, rubbing the welt on his head, but his jaw set with resolve. Whitlock paced slowly. "The pearls were meant as a distraction, but they gave me something better. Ink." His gaze pinned Samuel Keene. "You were the one most restless." Pacing, muttering. "And ink clings easily to restless hands." Keene scowled. "You think I need pearls? I've money enough of my own, detective." "Money enough, perhaps," Whitlock shot back. "But reputation? That's another matter. Eleanor Price had ways of ruining men without spending a dime." Keene's mouth opened, then shut tight. A muscle twitched at his jaw. Before Whitlock could press further, a heavy thud sounded above them. On the library's second floor, the group stiffened as one. Whitlock's eyes narrowed. The upper floor had been empty, silent, yet now something, or someone, moved in the stacks above. He raised the lantern, its glow stretching up the stairwell's shadows. "Stay here," he ordered firmly. "All of you." And with revolver drawn once more, he climbed the creaking stairs, every footstep echoing like a heartbeat. At the landing, the air was cooler. Dust lay thick across the floorboards, but fresh prints led between the towering shelves. The killer was here, and they were not alone. From the darkness ahead came the whisper of turning pages, and then, clear as a bell, Eleanor Price's voice, though she was long dead. On the library's second floor, Whitlock hears the impossible. Eleanor Price's voice drifting through the shelves, though the woman lies cold in death below. Whitlock froze mid-step, lantern lifted high, revolver steady in his hand. The whisper curled through the air like smoke, soft, feminine, unmistakable. "Do you think you're clever, detective? Do you think you'll find me?" Whitlock's jaw tightened. The voice wasn't Eleanor's ghost. It was a recording. Somewhere among the shelves, a machine played her words, mocking him. He followed the sound, his boots careful on the creaking boards. The dust was thick, but the footprints remained clear, weaving deeper into the maze of books. The voice rose again, tinny and distant. "None of you can escape what I know. Your secrets are mine, and they will be your undoing." Whitlock found it, a reel-to-reel recorder, perched on a side table, its spools turning lazily, the tape feeding Eleanor's venom into the shadows. The machine clicked to a stop as he approached. Silence crashed down like a curtain. Behind him, a shelf creaked. He whirled, lantern flashing, revolver raised, only to catch a fleeting shadow slipping between stacks. "Stop!" His command cracked through the gloom, but the figure darted faster, vanishing into darkness. Whitlock lunged forward, weaving between shelves, the light from his lantern dancing over spines of forgotten tomes. Dust spiraled up with each step. Ahead, a door slammed. The north reading room. He burst through, weapon ready. The room yawned wide, its long windows rattling in the storm, its tables draped in sheets. But it was empty. Empty, save for a single envelope left on the central table. Whitlock approached cautiously, lantern shaking just enough to betray the adrenaline in his veins. The envelope bore 2 bold letters, scrawled in Eleanor Price's sharp hand, J.W., his own initials. He opened it. Inside, a single sheet, no blackmail, no accusation, only a taunt written in fresh ink. "Catch me if you can." Whitlock's lips pressed into a hard line. The killer was not only ruthless, they were playing with him, and worse, they had studied him long enough to anticipate his every step. From below, a shout shattered the stillness. Green's voice, high and panicked. "Detective, come quick!" Whitlock shoved the note into his coat and bolted back down the stairs, the lantern's glow jerking wildly against the walls. On the main floor, the group stood huddled near the hearth, faces pale, eyes wide. Green pointed toward the great oak doors. "Someone tried to break the lock." Whitlock rushed over. The heavy iron latch bore fresh scratches, deep and jagged. A knife or chisel had worried at the metal. Someone had tried to force their way out, or let someone in. Clara clutched Annie, her voice trembling. "We heard it, scraping, scratching, and then it stopped." Whitlock examined the marks, then turned back. "Where's Mercer?" The group stiffened. The reverend was gone. Annie let out a soft cry. "He was just here. He said he needed air, but he never went to the window." Samuel Keene cursed. "I knew it. The holy man's no saint. He's behind all this." "Maybe," Whitlock said coldly. "Or maybe you're glad he's not here to defend himself." Thunder cracked overhead, rattling the very bones of the library. Whitlock drew a long breath. The net was tightening. The killer had the ledger, the pearls, and now they dared to mock him with Eleanor's voice and his own name. But if Reverend Mercer had slipped away, then the endgame was beginning. A sudden gust slammed through the room, scattering papers, and when Whitlock turned back to the hearth, Annie Fletcher was gone. The storm rages, secrets have vanished, and Detective Whitlock faces the final act, finding the missing ledger, uncovering the killer, and revealing the truth Eleanor Price died protecting. Whitlock's heart pounded as he scanned the main hall. Annie Fletcher was gone, one moment clinging to Clara's side, the next vanished into the shadows. The storm beat at the windows as if urging him to move faster. He dashed toward the side aisles, lantern raised high, calling her name. "Annie! Where are you?" No answer, only the echo of raindrops, the distant rumble of thunder, and the creaking of the tall shelves. Then a soft voice from the mezzanine above. "Detective Whitlock." He froze. Slowly he looked up. Annie stood at the top of the spiral staircase, a small bundle clutched to her chest, the brass key, and beside it, a thick envelope, clearly the missing ledger. Whitlock moved toward her, keeping his voice calm. "Annie, hand it over. You're safe now. No one can stop you here." She hesitated. "It's him, Detective." He's waiting for me. The one who killed Miss Price. He'll do it again if I move." Whitlock's eyes swept the mezzanine. Shadows shifted near the railing. Reverend Mercer stepped out, calm but intense, a long arm gesturing toward the stairwell. "Leave the child, detective. This ends tonight." Whitlock raised his revolver. "Mercer, step aside!" Mercer's lips pressed into a thin line. "You've discovered the ledger, yes, but you don't understand. Eleanor Price's records. They were not just of debts and secrets. They were a warning, and some debts demand payment in blood." Whitlock's mind raced. The ledger had names. Everyone's names. But Eleanor had never meant to let it fall into the wrong hands, and Mercer had taken it, using fear as his shield. "You killed her," Whitlock said, voice steady, eyes locked on the Reverend. "To protect the ledger or to exploit it?" Mercer's hands shook slightly. "I did what was necessary. She threatened to expose years of misdeeds, mistakes I have tried to atone for, but she went too far. I only intended to scare her, to secure the ledger, not to kill." Whitlock took a careful step closer. "Intentions don't erase consequences. You struck her, and now she's gone, but it ends here, Mercer. Hand over the ledger, or I will take it by force." Mercer's gaze faltered. For the first time, fear replaced his calm. Annie clutched the envelope tighter. Slowly, reluctantly, Mercer extended his hands. Whitlock moved swiftly, grabbing the ledger and securing the brass key in his pocket. "Enough games," he said firmly. "No one else will be hurt tonight." Outside, the storm began to ease, the rain a steady drizzle. Inside, the library seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. Whitlock guided Annie down the stairs. Green, Keen, Clara, and the rest gathered near the hearth, shaken but safe. Whitlock addressed the room, voice calm but firm. Miss Price kept secrets that could have ruined lives. The ledger was never meant for harm, only accountability. But greed and fear corrupted the heart of one man, and that cost her life. He looked at Mercer, restrained now by Bailey. "You'll answer for her death. The ledger will remain protected, and justice will follow." Annie handed Whitlock the brass key. "She trusted you with it, detective. You'll keep it safe?" Whitlock smiled faintly. "Safe, as long as this library stands." The storm cleared completely. Moonlight spilled through the tall windows, illuminating the marble floors and rows of quiet shelves. The library, once a place of shadow and fear, now held the calm of truth restored. Resolution. The ledger was secured, the killer apprehended, and the town's secrets preserved without further bloodshed. Detective Whitlock had unraveled deception, confronted greed, and protected the legacy Eleanor Price had safeguarded all those years. The storm had passed. The library was silent once more, but its walls held a lesson. Integrity and courage triumph over fear and secrecy. Whitlock paused at the entrance, gazing at the first rays of dawn. Some mysteries leave marks, but tonight, Mapleton Library had returned to its quiet vigil, secrets safe, debts accounted for, and justice finally served. The end.